Well, hi everybody. I didn't see
I
anybody.
think.
Oh no, I can't see. All I see is one person joining, so that's kind of weird. Anyway, good to see everybody here. I am here with my friend Gretchen Carlson, my colleague at Lift Our Voices, which is the nonprofit that we run together. I know that most people who subscribe to the Substack probably may not know that that's what I do, but Gretchen and I, after we both left Fox News, founded a nonprofit that fights against workplace toxicity and silencing mechanisms in the workplace. But most importantly, I wanted to talk with Gretchen today about this thing that's been going on that's been driving me crazy and both of us crazy, which is that the media has declared, Gretchen, that the Me Too movement is over.
Yeah. I
It
know
is?
you and I get a ton of angst when we see this.
Yeah.
Just so everyone watching knows, like early in the morning or middle of the night or whenever it is, we're texting each other going about a lot of things, but we're like, can you believe they just wrote this story now? So, we try to get our message out there about all the good work that we're doing. And it's kind of interesting because although we've gotten lots of great coverage, it seems that more often than not, some of the stories that are covered instead are the Me Too movement's dead, based on, I don't know, like Bill Cosby getting out of prison, or, something that they didn't like about the Diddy trial, or I guess the big thing is men that were canceled coming back, which we can talk about. But I do feel like the media bears responsibility for making sure that they're covering all sides of the story. And the other side of the story here, if you think Me Too is dead, is that we think it's very much alive. And we're working every day to make sure that it stays that way.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because you and I are in this space every single day. And you, when you left Fox News, and I'm just going to recap the story that you can't tell because Gretchen, like I do, has an NDA with Fox, but so she can't talk about her story, but I can talk about her story and probably be a lot less humble about her than she would be about herself. But Gretchen, I mean, you really did kick off this iteration of the Me Too movement in 2016 when you came forward so bravely and spoke up against our old boss, Roger Ailes, and talked about the fact that you've been sexually harassed and filed a lawsuit against him. And it was just I've told the story before, but for people who don't know, uh, Gretchen, it was right around the 4th of July, right? So
Yeah.
you were on vacation. I thought you were on vacation because you weren't
I was
around.
actually celebrating my 50th birthday. So they fired me on June 23rd. It was like, happy birthday.
Yeah.
And then I went on a trip with my sister. And then I was supposed to come back and talk about what we were going to tell everyone. And instead I filed the lawsuit.
I mean,
Surprise.
amazing. So I'm sitting there, and I mean, I'll never forget this day. I'm sitting there on the 12th floor of the News Corp building of Fox News, getting my hair and makeup done before I'm about to go. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Gretchen, I was supposed to be on your old show, but I just
Probably.
thought you weren't there to host it because you were on vacation, um, which was on that floor. And so I'm getting ready to go. I think I almost am positive that it was your show. And I was like, all right, Gretchen's not here because obviously it's the 4th of July. She's off with her family and whoever was, subbing in. And the person who I was supposed to be on with literally kind of hands me surreptitiously this cell phone like this, and he's like not saying anything. And I see this article blowing up, I think on Mediaite, that Gretchen Carlson files a sexual harassment lawsuit against Roger Ailes. And I'm thinking, holy shit, this woman, first of all, I couldn't believe, like, I was in shock. I think everybody in that building was in shock. I think everybody in America was in shock because he was
Yeah.
the most powerful man in media. And he was one of the most powerful men in the world. I mean, this is a man who people don't, if they don't remember or don't know, you'd have like members of Congress, Senate, presidential candidates, anybody who went into that building to do a show would go and kiss the ring on the second floor to Roger Ailes.
Yeah.
The presidents, I mean,
Well,
leaders of other
except you and I, because we never acquiesced. But anyway.
yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, a few of us refused to kiss any part of him, but yes, but so I just couldn't believe it, and I thought that surely you would be destroyed and not literally dead in a ditch somewhere, although maybe, but definitely just we never hear from you again. And not only was I completely wrong about that, but you ignited a movement that has just transformed this country. And so I think the frustration here is that people seem to have decided in the media space that this movement is now over, and it was a little glimmer of awesomeness for a couple of years, but now we're back to the dark old days. Why don't you tell people what you've been up to in the intervening years so they understand how very much alive the Me Too movement is?
Yeah, well, I want to credit all the other survivors who reached out to me after my case in the summer of 2016. I mean, that was really the catalyst for me to realize that I had to do something about this because, we all knew that it was an epidemic still in the workplace that people were being sexually harassed, but I didn't know that they were being silenced as much as they were. And that was also an epidemic. And so, I figured out like I got to do something about this. And so the biggest thing that I could think of after other people started reaching out for me from DC was let's try and change some laws. Let's try and make this so you can't force people into silence with NDAs and something wonky called forced arbitration. And, so the very short story of the long story is that then you and I formed Lift Our Voices, and we were successful in passing two bipartisan laws in 2022 that basically don't allow companies to silence you with forced arbitration or NDAs anymore for sexual misconduct. Two of the biggest labor law changes in the last 100 years. So, I mean, it's huge. Like, if you want to say that Me Too is dead, it's like, wait a minute. Like, even just that alone is groundbreaking, life changing. I mean, you know that on our website, liftourvoices.org, we have a campaign called #LoveJustice, which is video testimonials of people who have been helped by our laws. It's already happening in 3 years, and they're seeking justice because they have a frickin' voice. I mean, that is a huge victory for the Me Too movement. And so, yes, you and I get very irritated when we see these one-off articles that people think are going to get a lot of eyeballs by saying that something that was great is no longer. And we couldn't disagree more.
I mean, just in the last few weeks, you and I have been frantically working to pass legislation in Connecticut that would allow people to speak out if they have NDAs about not just sexual harassment and assault, but about all sorts of workplace toxicity. We're working on similar legislation in New York. And it's like, to me, I can't tell if it's just that reporters want the clicks. So they say, okay, we're going to proclaim the Me Too movement is over, or they just don't do their research. I'm not really sure. But the part that drives me equally crazy is when we see these articles, and we started seeing them within moments of you filing your lawsuit. So you file your lawsuit. I just want to give people the chronology if they don't know. You file your lawsuit in July, in June. No, July, right?
July 6th.
July of 20. We're coming up now on the 9th anniversary, which is insane.
Yeah.
Of 2016. I filed my lawsuit against Fox News and Roger Ailes 10 months later. And for people who don't really are thinking about maybe doing something similar. Look, courage is contagious, as Gretchen says, and it's so true. Had she not filed that lawsuit, I never would have had the guts to file my lawsuit. So it just takes one person to jump off the cliff, and you change so many different lives, and so many other people were able to come forward, among them women who came forward about Bill O'Reilly, he was not part of our lawsuit, but certainly at the time was the biggest on-air personality at Fox News by far, the number one show at 8 p.m. Huge. And what I find fascinating is almost as soon as Bill O'Reilly was forced out of Fox News for all of these sexual harassment settlements that Fox News had paid, I think it was like $40-60 million that they paid out and he paid out for sexual harassment. All of a sudden, there were stories within like 5 seconds. When's Bill O'Reilly coming back? And where's he going to reappear? And what's going to happen? And where's Bill O'Reilly going to land next? Where were the stories about the women who
Never.
were pushed out of Fox News? I mean, I could name 10 of them off the top of my head.
Yep.
Where
No, I
were
mean,
the stories about them?
I usually say it's about 3 weeks when some high profile man gets accused of something. And then you never, well, part of the reason you never hear from the women again is because they've been forced to sign NDAs, right? And so even if the other person, like an O'Reilly, has also signed an NDA, maybe he has, maybe he hasn't, but he still has the upper hand to be able to say what he wants to say, and the women can't respond. So that's the first reason why they disappear. But we also know that they get blackballed from their profession for simply having courage to come forward, and they've done nothing wrong. It's like, why are we not asking the questions in the media? What happened to all these women? And why aren't there powerful people out there saying, you know what, I'm going to hire those courageous people who did what was right. And I'm going to set the tone at my company that I'm not going to accept the fact that we're going to keep bad actors. We're going to try and salvage the people who come forward, who've had a bad experience, and we're going to get rid of the bad people. That's what you don't see in corporate America, and that's what you don't see in the media. And I think that I forget who do you think was the one who, a famous person who came back, who actually came back first, that started this sort of movement of Me Too, maybe, isn't that strong?
News Nation has all of them working for him.
Yep.
I mean, if you look at the News Nation lineup, it's O'Reilly's there all the time. I believe, I'm not even sure if I'm violating my NDA by invoking his name because he was one of the people who.
I'll say it. Bill
Go ahead.
Shine is a consultant there who used to be Roger Ailes at Fox News' second in command. And I believe that the person who actually runs News Nation was accused of some sort of massive sexual assault at Good Morning America.
Yeah, and Andrew Cuomo.
Chris
not
Cuomo.
Chris Cuomo, excuse me,
Yeah.
Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo was about to have a comeback in New York. I mean,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we could just say anybody, and they're about to come back. So on that side of things in media, Matt Lauer has not come back. Les Moonves, who used to run CBS, has not come back. Maybe they don't want to. I don't know. But they certainly would be able to ahead of women who have done nothing wrong. And so I think the moral of this story, Julie, is, and I can say this as a member of the media and a journalist, is that the media plays into the cultural beliefs that we have. And you and I always say it's tougher to change culture for these types of things than to even pass bipartisan laws in this hyper-political time. And that's saying a lot because culturally it's so embedded in us that we want to penalize the people who come forward and say that something bad is happening to them. And for whatever reason, we want to save the bad actors and suddenly bring them back to life. And so when the media writes these stories that the Me Too movement is dead, they're playing back into that vicious cycle of culture that, my God, we have to stop it. We have to stop it for our children. You and I are working every day to change the landscape for millions of people, but also for the next generation, for God's sake. And the media has to get training or get on board or start covering the stories about the good work that's being done. I know it's not as flashy, potentially, but I think it actually contributes to this vicious cycle of non-cultural change.
and it comes self-perpetuating prophecy because if you're a person who's thinking about coming forward about something happening to you at work, and all of a sudden you have a media that's basically saying the Me Too movement is dead and all of these people, there's no point in coming forward because it's over and the bad guys won, you're not going to come forward. And then the Me Too movement would be dead, right?
Yeah.
So they're not doing anybody any favors by saying this, especially because it's not true. As I said, we are on the cusp of passing legislation that would ban NDAs. First of all, New Jersey's already done it. California has done it. Washington State has done it in banning NDAs for all toxic workplace issues. We're about to expand that to Connecticut. We're about to expand that to New York. There's a wonderful woman in California who is passing legislation state by state by state that prevents defamation from being used to silence sexual assault survivors, because after the Johnny Depp case, what did we find out? We found out that all you have to do is threaten defamation and the woman will shut up because she doesn't want to be sued for defamation, which is what you're seeing in the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni case, what you're seeing, what you saw with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, who, by the way, I believe that will be ripe for a reckoning and a revisit in a few years. But there is good stuff happening. And for the life of me, I don't understand why it's not being discussed. So I think that's why we wanted to do this conversation with people and just take it directly to people. Look, I mean, the great thing about independent, I think, journalism and these kinds of platforms is you could just take it to people directly. You don't need to do it through the New York Times anymore. But shame on the New York Times. And I will say this, shame on the New York Times, because this is not, they've had column after column, story after story about how the Me Too movement is dead. Some of them well-meaning. Michelle Goldberg, who I think is generally very good and very thoughtful, had this column yesterday about how she went to go see a play about the Me Too movement and how she and everybody else left the theater in tears because it reminded them of these halcyon days of when the Me Too movement was real and women were taken seriously. And those days are over now. And the Me Too movement is dead. Well, Michelle, it's not. It's not. You should have called us because we would have told you it's not. We would have told you everything that we're doing successfully to make sure that it's not.
Yeah.
But she just didn't do that.
I think one of the biggest stories that I think led to this discussion of Me Too dying was Louis C.K. was like, I think the first person to kind of come back, the comedian, if you don't know who it was, because honestly, I didn't know who the hell it was till the allegations against him came forward. But he was one of the people to be able to go back out and do his gig. And then Bill Cosby got out of prison. And I remember that I got countless media requests to talk about the Me Too movement being dead. And the answer that I gave was, are you crazy? The only reason Bill Cosby was in prison is because of the Me Too movement, because it changed the hearts and minds of the way those jurors looked at cases like that. Instead of automatically not believing the women, they were like, wait a minute. We've been hearing a lot of stories like this, and we're going to start to believe these people, right? So they came into the process with a whole new mindset. That is a victory. He got out on a technicality that had nothing to do with whether or not the Me Too movement is still alive or still dead. But that was, I think, the biggest high profile story that started this whole rambling on. And to your point, it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now it's like the minute that a pin drops and there's a splinter of somewhat bad news, the media just pounces on it and says, it's over. It's all over. And it's just very frustrating for those of us who are in the trenches on a daily basis. And those of us who've had great success in changing culture.
I wonder if part of it, Gretchen, I don't know what you think about this, is that Donald Trump is an adjudicated sexual
Yeah,
assailant.
I was
He's,
just going to
you know,
say that.
and,
Yeah,
and, and nevertheless, he's the president of the United States. I mean, people voted for
twice.
him knowing twice, but people voted for him this time around after he'd been found to be liable for sexual assault, after he lost, I believe, at least one, possibly two cases where he was sued for defamation because he kept insisting that he wasn't, even though he was. So do you think maybe that's part of it, that people that the press is so Trump fixated that they're thinking, and by the way, Trump to me is kind of sui generis. Trump gets away with stuff that nobody else does. It doesn't
I
mean
agree.
everything is bad just because Donald Trump successfully got away with it. I don't think bribery statutes are dead just because Donald Trump gets away with it. I don't think taking money from people in exchange for official misconduct is dead just because Trump engages in it every day. So I could say that as you're a journalist, you might not be able to say that. This is my opinion, but Trump is Trump. It doesn't mean that everything else doesn't apply to everybody else, because it
Yes,
does.
I agree with you mostly. So two points. I worry now because we're seeing the resurgence of Andrew Cuomo in New York City, for example. And I got some tweets yesterday when I said I was going to be talking about it on CNN last night, which they never got to the topic. But I got some tweets saying, we like him, he gets shit done. So, that's that.
Yeah.
And so that falls into what I was going to say is that before Donald Trump or after Donald Trump was elected the first time, I wrote a New York Times op-ed saying that I was, extremely disappointed that voters would put their feelings about policy, like immigration or the economy or whatever, ahead of human rights violations and the way in which we treat people. Like, do those people have children? Do they not care that they might be sexually harassed or discriminated against in any possible way? And the answer that I received back was, well, we just care about our pocketbook right now. We just care about our wallet. We care about the border. And that's that. So I was equally disappointed the second time when, voters didn't feel that way about somebody like Trump, who by that point had actually been convicted. So my second part, Julie, is I fear that with this resurgence of Andrew Cuomo, because he's a Democrat on either side, I fear that that may be the one thing that somebody other than Trump in politics may be able to get away with now, because they'll say, well, Trump did it. Trump was accused of these kinds of things. And I worry that that's the one thing that's going to slip through and be acceptable for Democrats. Now, as an independent political analyst, I would say that would be really stupid for Democrats to pick any candidate that's tarnished. I don't care what it is, because the Democratic Party has to rebuild right now. So that's a whole separate conversation. But I don't think that they should pick somebody who's already tarnished. But I worry that that won't matter in the mayoral race in New York City.
Yeah, I live in New York, and I think what I've been hearing about people who are supporting Cuomo is the yes, but. And the but is the subways are a mess. The homeless situation is a mess. The housing crisis is a mess. And as you said, Andrew Cuomo gets shit done. And at a time of crisis, and a lot of people feel the city is in crisis in the same way that a lot of people felt, obviously, the United States was in crisis when they voted for Trump, that these kinds of tertiary issues, because they don't affect you every day, are not as important as things that are um, important to you every day. For example, being able to afford to live in New York City, being able to ride the subway in peace, being able to walk down the street with your kids and not be assaulted, and so on and so forth. And I conceptually understand that some people don't have the luxury of worrying about these kinds of things, and you and I are fortunate that we don't have to worry about losing our house and things like that. However, I also think that this is not a tertiary issue because it is something that affects you every day, whether you know it or not. Because one day, like Gretchen and I, you may find the job that you had thought you were successfully prospering in, the career that you had killed yourself to build, is gone simply because the wrong person decided that they wanted to have sex with you.
Yeah.
or they called you the N-word, or they discriminated against you based on your gender or your sexual orientation or your disability or any number of things that people can discriminate against you, or they
Well,
just treated you horribly because they didn't
yeah,
like the cut of your jib,
yeah.
right? And all of a sudden you may find that your economic well-being, your psychological well-being, the well-being of your children who depend on you for this job is no more.
Yeah.
And so that's, I understand that you have to think about that kind of more long term because it's not as pressing as not being able to afford your rent in New York City. But nevertheless,
I get
it
it.
is an issue.
I
Yeah.
get it, but 1 in 4 women are sexually assaulted in this world. So if you wanna really look at the statistics of how important this is, like, how much are you affected by the border? I mean, I guess people would argue that if they live in border states, a lot. But would you argue that your taxpayer money's going to illegals? I mean, this is kind of a bigger topic, but if 1 in 4 women are assaulted, that's kind of a big deal. And yet
Yep.
we seem to push that down, and to your point, think about things that affect us on a daily basis. I mean, one of the things you and I know from doing this work is that especially with this kind of behavior, people don't become concerned about it until it actually happens to them. And then, based on the stuff we're working on with things they've signed in their contract, like forced arbitration clauses and NDAs, it's too late, folks. It's too late because on the first day of work, you signed this document and you had no earthly idea that it meant you were going to be silenced for your entire life. You had no earthly idea that if you came forward, you were not going to be able to have a lawsuit, that you were going to go to this other thing called arbitration, where the company almost always wins. And you had no idea that you would never probably work again in your chosen career. So that's why we work so hard to educate people on these things, because we want them to care about it before it actually happens. And it's very analogous to who people vote for, to your point, that they're not thinking about that when they go into the ballot box. They're not thinking about that until it actually might happen to them.
And let me just give people sort of a scenario here, which is a semi-true scenario because I'm making up names and locations here, but this did happen. Imagine if you are living down south and you work for a big box store and it is the only employer for miles around. Like literally everybody works for this one big box store unless they work at a restaurant or somewhere. But truly, this is the employer where most of the town works and most of the county works. And you work as a cashier at this big box store. And you never realized that when you did your onboarding paperwork, you signed paperwork that says that you cannot sue if you are sexually harassed, which we now changed the law where you are allowed to do that. But under this scenario, before, you are not allowed to do this. Still, if you're racially discriminated against, you cannot sue. You've signed an arbitration agreement. And something bad happens to you, like somebody calls you the N-word and truly makes your life a living hell for working. Your supervisor is white. I'm making this part up, and you are black. and you are racially discriminated against every single day to the point where you feel unsafe working there. You go to your HR department and you say, "This happened to me." And they say, "Oh, okay. Well, we're going to give you 6 months severance, which is not a lot because you're living paycheck to paycheck. You got to go. And we're going to call bygones bygones. You can go." And that's that. And what's going to end up happening is that you're also going to sign a no rehire provision, which means that you can never apply to work at this company again. And you have no choice.
I
And where do you think you work? And where do you think you go to get a paycheck in that scenario where this is the only employer within 50, 100 miles? You either
Yep.
have to pick up and move your family to God knows where your entire life and your community is in this town. Your parents live there, your siblings live there. This is all you've ever known. You have no money. You're basically working minimum wage. You have 6 months of minimum wage, which is not enough to get you through life. What do you do?
I know.
And that, my friends, is a lot more serious than somebody coming across the border who, by the way, is not stealing your job because now you don't have a job to go to.
Yeah. But right. So look, we're the only organization, Lift Our Voices, doing this kind of work in the US, which um, I look, we are so gratified that we can help so many people or work to help so many people. But there's only two of us to shout off the mountaintops, look at your contracts, know what's going on, don't sign these things, be educated, vote for people who are not bad actors, put human rights situations ahead of any kind of other policy that you may agree with. Because if we don't start to break away and change culture, this is going to continue to go on for generations. And you and I believe that this is actually the silver bullet to equity. The silver bullet to equity is giving people their own voice and their ability to tell the truth and not have the negative repercussions. That's where we need to get to.
Well, before you go, I want to ask you a question that has nothing to do with our work in the Me Too space, but it is breaking news in the last couple of days, and you and I have not even discussed it. So, as you know, the President of the United States is a huge Fox News watcher, and it's
Yeah.
particularly Fox and Friends. There was an article that Tulsi Gabbard, who is the national security, not the national security advisor, sorry, director of national intelligence, who is in charge of the president's daily brief, has had a very hard time getting the president to read the daily brief. He's only accepted the daily brief, I think, 12 days out of the more than 100 that he's been in office, but he's apparently never read it. So they're thinking very hard about how to get the president. Do you know about the story? How they're getting the
No,
president?
but you know
Yeah.
what, Julie, I'm so sorry.
You gotta go?
My mom's trying to reach me. It's kind of an emergency.
Gotta go.
I
All
know. But
right.
thanks for the
Bye.
great conversation.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay. Bye.